Causes of the Russian Revolution were widespread inflation, food shortages, a large number of casualties from World War I, a disastrous economy, an unstable leader, protests that turned into riots. On January 22, 1905, a group of workers alongside Georgy Gopon gave a list of demands to the Tsar. This event was known as Bloody Sunday.
We need to take action and write a petition to the Tsar to improve working and living conditions.
We want better treatment! We want better working conditions! We want action now!
These workers seem very violent. They are posing a threat to the Tsar.
We want better treatment! We want better treatment!
Extra, read all about it. Imperial forces kill hundreds of peaceful protesters at the Winter Palace.
In January of 1905, after the abolition of serfdom, which freed serfs from being bound to a hereditary plot of land, changes were made to the Russian government as a result of the revolutions of 1905. The revolutions were mass waves of social and political unrest. Because of this, the Tsar was faced with a critical decision: to keep the autocracy that gave him complete power, or to give in to what the people desired.
Sir, the workers have gone on strike. If we create a legislative body, it might be able to calm down the uprisings.
We can make a representative assembly that's its approval would be necessary for all legislation. I enact the fundamental laws. The Duma can not have control over state ministers, and they can't control portions of the state budget. This will limit their ability to legislate effectively.
The Tsar enacted the fundamental laws a few months before the Duma first met, taking away most of their power.
Because of Russia's involvement in the Great War, the economy was disrupted with war effort costs. People from moderate and radical parties wanted to overthrow the Tsar. This uprising was known as the March Revolution of 1917.
Peace and bread, down with the autocracy.
The situation isn't that serious. If the weather was bad, they wouldn't be out here. But you should send over troops just to break up the crowds.
Yes, send down some troops. We can't have the ideas of the protesters spreading.
Yes, of course. We need to send troops down to the palace to contain the situation.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Peace and bread! Peace and bread! Peace. Go home, guys. Go home. The revolution stops for nothing! Peace and bread!
Our country has descended into chaos. We need to create a provisional government working with the Petrograd Soviet to control revolution. And the leader will be Alexander Kerensky.
Extra, read all about it. Tsar abdicates the throne in favor of new provisional government.
The Bolsheviks have waited a long time to attain the majority in Russia, and now they just barely have enough to seize power near the end of 1917.
Now is the time to take over the provisional government.
We confirm the transfer of power from a provisional government to a new Soviet government.
The new government is called the Council of People's Commissioners, and I, Lenin, am the new head of the government.
And thus, the November Revolution led to the creation of Soviet Russia.
Sir, there's a lot of unrest following the change of government. I decree the creation of an extraordinary commission, and we will call them the Cheka. They will act as a sword and shield for our revolution and government, but will act outside the law to eliminate enemies of the regime.
Lenin, now that you're in power, what are you going to do about the promises that you made?
We'll end our involvement in the Great War.
It's not that simple. By leaving the Triple Entente, we will have to negotiate and give away our territory.
We just need to get out of this war and give our country some peace.
Lenin, the Bolshevik regime is facing opposition. What should we do?
We need to fight back to keep the Bolshevik party in power.
I will reinstate the draft and apply rigid discipline to the soldiers for an effective army.
I will tell the Cheka to target enemies against the new regime.
The people loyal to the Tsar, people of the bourgeois, aristocratic liberals, anti-Leninist socialists, and even Allied forces were against Russia's new regime. The people who were against the Bolsheviks were called the Whites, and the Bolsheviks were called the Reds. Wars and uprisings against the two were fought all over Russian territories.
Because of weak unity, the Whites lost the war while the Reds were triumphant. After the Russian Civil War fought over the overthrowing of the monarchy, Ukraine was retaken by the Bolsheviks after giving up Ukraine in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The year after, the new regime regained control over independent nationalist governments in the Caucasus. During the Civil War, the communist regime had transformed Russia into a bureaucratically centralized state dominated by the Bolsheviks. The White Army started pogroms, which were organized acts of violence against the Jewish population in Kiev, in Ukraine, Siberia, Mongolia, and Belarusia in Russia. Later in the same year, the White Army Division murdered 1,500 Jews in Fastov, Poland, and many more pogroms were started by citizens in Ukraine. The economy is in total breakdown because of years of mismanagement and total war, from the Russo-Japanese War, the Great War, and the Civil War. We need to reinstate stability into our economy.
We can introduce agriculture, retail trade, and small-scale light industry to private ownership.
But what will the state still have control of?
The state will still control heavy industry, transport, banking, and foreign trade. We will undo war communism done by the Great War and the Civil War. In 1921, Lenin introduced his new economic policy, commonly known as the NEP. The NEP was essentially a modified version of the old capitalistic system. Later, Lenin and the communists created a new state called the USSR, or the Soviet Union.
The NEP will only be temporary, of course, seeing as I'm only using it to achieve the goals of communism. To spread the Soviet rule, however, I will create the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics across Europe.
The NEP actually ended up on saving the Soviet Union from the complete and utter disaster that was falling upon Russia.
Lenin was shot by Kaplan, speaking at a factory in Moscow. She was a member of the Social Revolutionary Party and fired 3 shots, striking Lenin twice but not killing him. He later suffered multiple strokes and was forced into bed rest. He eventually passed away in 1924.
Long-term causes of the Russian Revolution was that Russia was economically backwards, their culture was not united, there was a rise of threat to the middle class, and the rise of Marxism. It created a spread of communism across Europe with the USSR.